May proceed? Honorable Chepkonga, you may move the motion.
Thank you, Honorable Speaker. I thought the clerk was still reading. Honorable Speaker, I beg to move that the House adopts the report on the Universities Regulations 2023, legal notice number 56 of 2023, laid on the table of the House on Thursday, 14 September 2023, and pursuant to Section 15, subsection 4 of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013, recommends to the House to annul in entirety the University Regulations 2023 on the following reasons, among others, Madam Speaker. Madam Speaker, this was a very vibrant discussion with the Cabinet Secretary for Education. We made so many recommendations for them to effect amendments, and we wanted them to withdraw the regulations so that we do not need to annul them. But since they have refused to do so, we are recommending to the House that these regulations be annulled in its entirety on the following reasons. One, with regard to the question of certificates and diplomas and degrees, Honorable Speaker, Part 11 of the regulations provides for the recognition and equation of degrees, diplomas, certificates conferred as or awarded by foreign universities and institutions, among others, Madam Speaker. The regulation seeks to usurp the role and functions of the Kenya National Qualification Authority, which is established under an Act of Parliament, which is the Kenya National Qualification Framework Act, number 22 of 2014. Madam Speaker, this is a body which is responsible for the establishing of standards for harmonization and recognition of national and foreign qualification, advising and supporting any person, body, or institution which is responsible for the award of national qualifications and defining the levels of qualification and competencies. There's therefore need to have consulted the authority to demonstrate consultation on the regulation itself and its impact on the national qualification regulations. Because, Madam Speaker, the national qualification regulations provides very explicitly and clearly, and does not leave any room for any other institution to purport to take over the functions of the Kenya National Qualification Framework Authority. And so to that effect, Madam Speaker, these regulations are in contravention of Section 13A of the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013, which requires that all regulations must conform to all other written laws. These regulations, Madam Speaker, do not conform to all other written laws. The second one, Madam Speaker, is that these regulations did not, the statutory making body did not provide any regulatory impact statement. This is important in the sense that, Madam Speaker, the university regulations, as promulgated by the minister, every and in a big percentage affects the citizens and families of this country, not only economically, but also socially. And for both learners and parents and guardians and sponsors, including workers employed by the universities. Section 6, Section 7, and Section 8 of the Statutory Instruments Act 2013 requires that where regulations are likely to impose significant costs on the community, then they ought to conduct a regulatory impact statement and submit a regulatory impact statement to the committee. They failed to do so, Madam Speaker, to conduct and to publish a regulatory impact statement in the Gazette or newspapers of wide circulation, and thereby contravening Section 6, Section 7, and Section 8 of the Statutory Instruments Act. And on that note, Madam Speaker, we are therefore recommending that since they did not comply with the Statutory Instruments Act that governs the making of all regulations, these regulations must be annulled in its entirety. The third, Madam Speaker, is that the committee noted that the regulations fall short of complying with the minimum threshold set out in Article 10, Article 118, and Article 259, Sub-Article 11 of the Constitution, as read with Section 5 and Section 5A and 13 of the Statutory Instruments Act of 2013 in relation to conducting public participation prior to the publication of the regulations. Madam Speaker, we consider this as very important. This is a very important tenet and doctrine of the Constitution, that public participation must be conducted where it intends to affect any person in this country. These regulations, they were promulgated without carrying out public participation as required by Article 10 and 118 and 259 of the Constitution, Madam Speaker. So in bringing these regulations, they are illegal in the first instance. So we should annul them, and they should comply, and they should conduct public participation so that they can hear what the citizens and all those who will be affected want to say concerning these regulations, and they should therefore amend as necessary. The fourth, Madam Speaker, is non-compliance with relevant policies to improve standards, like the report of the Presidential Task Force on the recommendations of the university's education. Madam Speaker, you know, one of the cardinal questions that we ask them is that we have a task force which has made certain recommendations, and those recommendations are being implemented right now. And you are submitting regulations which should have included those recommendations which you are now implementing. And those recommendations are in the form of a guideline. The Statutory Instruments Act requires that anything that is promulgated in the form of a guideline or a policy or a regulation must be brought to this House for approval. Madam Speaker, those regulations, those recommendations and guidelines are being implemented without this House approving them. They are highly illegal. It is affecting the education sector in this country. It is affecting people. Even when you say, Madam Speaker, it could be good policies. Like, for instance, they are saying that the funding for the universities will follow a certain trajectory. Now, those regulations have not been brought to this House, and they are implementing them, and it is affecting our students. If we go to our constituencies, we are being asked, we are being told to pay over 500,000. We as members of parliament, we do not know what to tell them. And those regulations have not been brought here, and it is affecting the people. So what we are saying, Madam Speaker, is that these regulations should be annulled, and those recommendations should be included in the next regulations which will be brought to this House. Madam Speaker, you know, some people think that they are very important. You know, during your time, Madam Speaker, as the chair of this committee, you annulled the judiciary regulations, judiciary fund regulations, and the judiciary itself appreciated that, in fact, the regulations themselves were unconstitutional. And in fact, pursuant to the recommendations that you made, they went further and amended those regulations. They brought back, and you approved the regulations. So, Madam Speaker, we are asking those who are regulating, making authorities to comply with that Statutory Instruments Act, the enabling statute, and the Constitution. Madam Speaker, we cannot allow people to usurp the role of Parliament. Article 95 of the Constitution is very clear. There is no person in this country which has been given the power to make laws except this House, Madam Speaker. And so anybody who proposes to usurp him, we will take a dim view of that particular action, Madam Speaker. So the regulations do not, therefore, Madam Speaker, provide for the notice of the intention to revoke the interim letter of authority which negates the right to fair administrative action. Madam Speaker, these regulations provide for revocation of charters or letters of authority that have been granted by universities. Now, they do not provide for mechanism of due process, and provided under Article 47 of the Constitution. Where you want to take away the right of people, you must have a due process in which you then take away that particular right that has been granted to that particular institution, to that particular person. These regulations do not confer that right, Madam Speaker, in contravention of Article 47 of the Constitution. And so, therefore, we are recommending to this House that these regulations be annulled in its entirety, and that the statutory making body makes the necessary amendments and brings back those regulations. It is not for them to imagine that because we have annulled these regulations, they are going to sit on them. We are going to call for these regulations because it is affecting the students, it's affecting the parents, the guardians, affecting the university employees. So those regulations must be brought to the House. The committee wishes to express its gratitude, Madam Speaker, to you and the clerk for the support that was given to this committee. And on behalf of, I would like to single a particular one member who took time to go through these regulations with a tooth comb, the Honorable Ruto. In fact, he had so many proposals on the things that were wrong with these regulations, Madam Speaker. In fact, we gave the Cabinet Secretary, and he was shocked. In fact, he had to request for adjournment because of the shock that he saw with which the Honorable Ruto was passionate about pointing out the inconsistencies in the regulations with the Statutory Instruments Act, with the Universities Act. I know a question has been asked, Madam Speaker, as to what will happen to the digital university that we approved here, because part of it was anchored on these regulations. As you know, the regulations, anything that has been made pursuant to these regulations cannot be null and void. Two, Section 70 of the Universities Act gives the minister to grant charters to universities. So this digital university is part of the university, although it is a digital university, it's operating in the cloud, but it is still a university in its form. So the Section 70 of the Universities Act still preserves it. Two, Madam Speaker, this House approved the charter itself. So when the House approved the charter, it was in a form of regulations. So there is nothing that is inconsistent with what we did, Madam Speaker. And so I'd like to sincerely thank the members of my committee for the support that they have given to the committee in ensuring that these regulations are considered in a timeous manner. It is therefore my pleasure and duty to present to the House the committee's report on the consideration of the University Regulation 2023, legal notice number 56 of 2023, that recommends that it be annulled in its entirety. And I beg to move, and I would like to call upon the former powerful Cabinet Secretary for Internal Security, the Honorable Sunguli, the Member of Parliament for Kilgoris, and the member of this committee to second. I thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Madam Speaker, I want to